Hello, everyone. If you want access to today's slides, go ahead and grab those. Right now, you can download the PDF version, so you have access to that. As we're going through, you'll have access to the different slides and everything there. And we do have several links that you'll want to take a look at and make sure that you have that information. Some new releases from the Microsoft side, and some additional things that you'll maybe want to take a look at as we go through. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump in. We're going to cover the October Patch Tuesday. We're going to talk about some recent news and some releases and things that you'll want to be aware of. We're going to have Todd's going to jump in and give us an update on the bulletins and releases. And we're going to also go into what we refer to as in between the Patch Tuesdays. So that in between Patch Tuesdays is looking at everything outside of Microsoft's Super Tuesday, the Patch Tuesday event, and looking at all the other security releases that have released since last month. This is rather important as the experience there helps you to understand all the other things that you want to keep an eye on. Many of you are familiar with this already, but you get the once a month update from Microsoft. Some of the other vendors, like we're going to see Chrome and Zoom today in the mix with what released yesterday, but all those other updates that continuously release as well, they may be things that you need to include in your updates as well this month. So we'll want to just make sure you're aware of those. All right, so yesterday, Google Chrome did make it into the mix. We got the update for Google Chrome. We've got an update from Microsoft with 7 updates that we'll be talking about there that Todd's going to walk us through. And then we've got the Zoom update as well. That one happily coincided with Patch Tuesday this month. They are a good example of one of those vendors that just does more of a continuous release. We usually see 1, maybe 2 on average security releases from Zoom each month. This one just happened to coincide with the Patch Tuesday release, so we were able to get it included there. All right, so digging into the news lineup. The much anticipated Windows 11 24H2 is finally out and available. That released on October 1st. There's a link in here to the Microsoft page if you want to check that out. Biggest thing to keep in mind with this is our kind of longest running branch that service-wise that you'll want to be aware of. It's service for 24 months, and the Enterprise for Pro Edition and the Enterprise Edition for 36 months. So this is your ideal branch to start moving everybody towards. The second half of each year is typically where we get that longer servicing branch edition. And speaking of long-term service branches, for those of you who do use the LTSC, both Windows 11 and Office have released their 2024 LTSC editions as well. So if you do have kiosks, IoT devices, whatever else that does run on more of those LTSC branches, the new branches or the new LTSC editions are available there as well. So check those out if that is something your organization uses. For those of you on the server side, Windows Server 2025 preview is also expected for Microsoft Ignite in November. So take a look at that, see what's new and coming, and keep an eye out for that coming this next month. So that's the lineup of new editions from Microsoft that you'll want to be aware of. On the news side, the biggest one here, there's a couple of articles that were talking about some of the 0 days activities that were happening since last Patch Tuesday, some ransomware activity and other things there. Most of you are probably past the need to respond to those, but just so you're aware of some of the recent activities that have been going on there, some ransomware exploits and other activities that were happening there. So if that's something that if you're on, especially for those of you who might be on an N-1 for parts of your environments, just a good thing to be aware of. A lot of times right after Microsoft or other vendors release their updates, there can be a lot of threat actor activity against the vulnerabilities that were resolved. Typically, you start to see a kind of a ramp up in that first 14 days after an update is released resolving vulnerabilities. That's kind of the ramp up, and then usually, we see most of the activity that's going to occur. New exploits and things like that will have happened by that 14-day mark. Hence why many of you have a 14-day SLA. That's a lot of the security guidance that's developed here between 2016 and now. A lot of the trends have been pushing up to that type of frequency. The last article there is from this month, the Microsoft Fixes Management Console RCE 0-Day. This one you'll want to be aware of because for those of you running Microsoft Config Manager, there is an additional step you need to do for this one. You do actually have to log into the Config Manager Management Console and do the in-console update process for this one to fully resolve CVE 2024-43572. So keep that in mind. As you're going through these, you'll have an additional step there on the config manager side to fully resolve that vulnerability. Now, that article does talk a little bit about some of the concerns. There were, Microsoft has noted that there's been no indicators of compromise or telemetry regarding any exploits, but it's definitely one that they're suggesting people don't leave too long because it is able to be remotely exploited if they're on your network. And with that, it does give them, it's a fairly dangerous one if they do take advantage of it. So it was one of the criticals this month. So those are the articles to keep an eye on from the news perspective there. Again, if you need access to any of those links under docs in the Goldcast platform there, you can see the October Patch Tuesday slide deck. Go ahead and download that PDF version right now, and you can get access to those slides. All right. So let's get into some more of the details on the specific vulnerabilities that we're looking to make sure that you're aware of this month. The first one is one of the two known exploited vulnerabilities. This one's the Management Console Remote Code Execution vulnerability. That's one where they haven't released any indicator of compromise content or anything like that, but there are some targeted attacks that have occurred with this one. Again, this is where you need to do that additional step to do the in-console update. I'm sorry, this is the MSC one. No, Microsoft's Management Console, the MSC vulnerability. So this is one where Microsoft's MSC interface, when you export an MSC config, you have a file that then you can move over and import into another Microsoft console and be able to basically take that configuration and use it in other parts of your environment. So what this fix is doing is basically enforcing a level of trust validation when one of those MSC files is opened. So the way that the threat actors can take advantage of this one is they can generate a MSC file and basically modify it in a way where it can exploit this vulnerability. And with that, they can then take advantage of that remote code execution. So this is basically just updating the way that the management console enforces things to make sure that it's looking at that file more, it's scrutinizing it more and making sure that it's a trusted file. And if it's not, blocking it from being able to run. So this is one of the two that was confirmed to be exploited. My apologies, I read that for a second and my brain went from Microsoft's config manager console over to the MSC, which they're two separate things. So this one is the MSC vulnerability. It is actively being exploited in the wild. It's updated by doing the OS update. So it does affect all versions of the operating system, including the newly released Windows 11 24H2. So make sure that you've got your OS update prioritized as your top priority this month. The second vulnerability that is being targeted is the Windows MS-HTML platform spoofing vulnerability. The severity on this one was only moderate. So, many of you who have been following us for a while, you've heard me talk about this many times. We can't always take the vendor severity and the CVSS score at face value. That's a starting point. It's a static algorithm. It tries to assess things and give you a general idea of the risk there. Most of the exploits we see are not in vulnerabilities that are rated as critical by Microsoft or have a high CVSS score. So so far this year, I think out of all the 0 days that Microsoft has resolved, not maybe only one of those was actually rated as critical. Majority of them were importance. And now this, I believe, is the second one this year that was a moderate severity with a CVSS score in the 6x or lower range. I think 2 or 3 months ago, we had a 5x for a CVSS score. So those things don't really matter to threat actors. They're going to find things that they can take advantage of. And oftentimes a harder to exploit vulnerability like this is chained with other ones to basically get the combo that they need to take over a system. So again, when we talk about things like this, you should be shifting to more of a risk-based approach. In a case where we've got other real-world risks to be taken into account, you need to basically take that initial severity rating and CVSS score, but treat it as a higher risk to the environment. So make sure that this and the other vulnerability, because they're both important or moderate, these are the two that you really need to worry about this month. Make sure that that's coming into your prioritization, and you're aware that the two exploits that are actively being targeted right now are both part of the OS. Your OS update this month is definitely going to be your top priority. All right, we did have 3 other vulnerabilities that were publicly disclosed, but not there's no exploitation currently going on for these. The first one is another curl open source curl vulnerability. So the Windows version of curl has an update available. The OS update should resolve this for most cases, but there is a couple of specific standalone versions of curl that can be updated to resolve that as well. If your development teams or engineering teams are using that in some way, they may have to do some updating of that standalone version, but the OS update takes care of the version of curl that ships with the OS. The second vulnerability is in Windows Hyper-V. It's a security feature bypass. This one, in the write-up that they did, they talk about the fact that it's a little bit harder to take advantage of, and this is why the severity and CVSS score are a little bit lower. There needs to be a reboot in the workflow to be able to try to exploit this. Now, can a threat actor convince somebody to have to reboot? Yeah, there's ways that they can socially engineer that, sure. But basically, they would have to, figure out a way to force a reboot into the experience, and then on reboot, they're able to take advantage of the UEFI interface to bypass the security interfaces there. If they do that, they get kernel level access at the hypervisor level. So that's their way of being able to bypass the UEFI security interfaces and try to get down to a kernel level where they can do some much more dangerous things. And the third one is a WinLogon elevation of privilege vulnerability. Another important vulnerability, an attacker who successfully exploits this can gain system level privileges. So this is one where those of you who have multi-lingual keyboards and interfaces throughout your environment. The way that an attacker can take advantage of this is using a third-party IME. So that input experience, if you go into the knowledge base article where they talk about this more, it has a screenshot of the login screen. And if you have multiple keyboard layouts for that system, you'll basically have options that are available there for English, for Chinese simplified, and so on. When you start to deal with different keyboard layouts where you've got, maybe you've got a Chinese keyboard or something like that, Japanese keyboard, or any of the an Arabic keyboard or one of the other types there, These IMEs allow you to interface with the login experience to make sure you're using the right keyboard layout to input the password. Companies that use Microsoft's IMEs, that's the ideal experience here, and what Microsoft is suggesting is the most optimal here. They still plug the vulnerability, but using a third-party IME leaves you exposed to whatever that IME was designed for. So in this case, somebody who maybe has a third-party IME experience for login is able to, put something else in there, so they could introduce something else into the mix where they could glean additional information or, do something else during that sign-in process. So Microsoft's additional guidance here is use their IME experience if you're doing that, and that helps to further insulate you from any future vulnerabilities in this type of scenario. All right, switching over to the Ivanti updates. So there were 5 updates for Ivanti products this month as well. For those of you who are using the Velocity product, there was a security advisory for Velocity License Server. So 1 CVE being resolved, CVSS score of 7.0. And 5.1 versions prior, in versions prior to 5.1.2, those are the versions affected, but 1 CVE being resolved there. For those of you running on the Connect server, Ivanti Cloud Service Appliance, sorry, the CSA had a few more vulnerabilities here. Last month we talked about the CSA, and there was a vulnerability that was resolved there. This month we did resolve 3 more, and this month we do actually have reports of a small number of customers that have been exploited with these vulnerabilities. So the vulnerability from last month chained with one of the 3 vulnerabilities that we're looking at here for this month. That's how the threat actors were exploiting this vulnerability. A couple of very important things about this. These reports of exploitation happened after last month's update, but they definitely there were confirmed cases of targeted attacks using the CSA vulnerabilities that are listed down below. If you have not already, you should definitely update to version 5.1.9, which resolves the 3 additional vulnerabilities here, which will take care of the immediate concern. More importantly, the CSA 4.6 version has an end-of-life date announced. So we do highly suggest, if you have not already done so, please look at the upgrade to CSA 5.0. This is moving from an appliance-based to an application-based CSA gateway. It gives you, it does a number of things. We were able to retire a lot of older code libraries and things like that from there. In those cases, those were actually the parts of code that were vulnerable in this particular case. So 5.0 is much more insulated from many of these types of vulnerabilities that we're resolving here. More importantly, though, the application-based CSA allows you to better manage the Linux distro that it's running on. We had customers who wanted to be able to use whatever security tools they were using in their environment. When we manage the full appliance, it makes that more difficult by making it an application and making it so that you can apply the same configurations and capabilities that you do elsewhere in your environment. It gives you a lot more flexibility to better secure that device and lock it down according to your policies. So it gives you a lot of advantages there. It is a newer code base. It's removed a lot of legacy code to give a better overall secure experience there as well. And that's the version going forward. So if you have not already, take this as an opportunity to look at that upgrade to the CSA 5.0 branch and move over to the latest version there. Next update was Ivanti Endpoint Manager Mobile. There was 1 vulnerability resolved here. The affected versions are 12.1.0.3 and prior. So if you're running on an older version there is 1 CVE resolved in this month's update that you'll want to take a look at getting that updated. 2 more to go. Ivanti Connect Secure and Policy Secure had a CVE, and this is the out of the CVEs that we're resolving this month, this was the highest rating. So this was the only critical this month. Everything else was high or lower. So this one had a CVSS score of 9.1. You can see the affected versions there. All versions before 22.7 are 2.1, and Policy Secure 22.7 are 1.1. So if you're running on any of those older versions, again, make sure that you apply the latest update here to resolve that one CVE there. Last update for those of you running on Ivanti Avalanche 6.4.5, there were 5 CVEs that were resolved. And if you're on 6.4.2.3 or 3.1.3 or earlier, you're affected by this. So updating to 6.4.5 will resolve these 5 vulnerabilities. Special thanks, by the way, for Richard Warren from Amberwolf, who with his assistance on the Connect Secure vulnerability. So he was the security researcher who did report that one. So we always appreciate it when researchers are giving us the information we need to better secure our customers. So kudos to Richard for his investigation work there. All right, switching gears over to the Linux side, we've got a couple of Linux vulnerabilities that we're going to talk about real quick here. The first one, CVE 2024-37371. The flaw was originally disclosed in June, but has been updated to reflect it's also affecting Debian 11 and 12. So if you saw this in an earlier time frame, that was when it was identified for Ubuntu and Enterprise Linux. Now Debian 11 and 12 have been added to the mix. The next one here, 2024-45492. This one is a vulnerability in XML parsing utility libexpat. The component providing this functionality to third-party applications contains a flaw in the parsing logic, which can be abused and cause a buffer overflow. So to mitigate this, ensure that you're using the libexpat version 2.6.3 or later, and that would address the issue. The next one here, there's actually a few CVEs on this one. CVE 2024-47076, 47175, 47176, and 47177. It's a chain of CVEs affecting cups. There is a special note here. There's a CVSS score of 10.0 on the vulnerabilities here. If you look to the bottom right there, that CVSS score is being disputed because by default, this on server installations, this would not be running. So if you're in a case where that's not running, the CVSS score is lower. If it is running, absolutely a 10 and something you definitely need to be concerned about. So the guidance here is, evaluate this. If it is running in your environment, definitely make sure that you're addressing this. What happens is the CUPS daemon can be tricked to remotely into accepting any IP as a printer, in which case they can basically spoof a printer in that environment and try to take advantage of running arbitrary code as root. So particularly nasty if you are running this CUPS service and you get targeted by somebody trying to take advantage of this vulnerability. There is a servicing stack update this month for server 2012 and 2012 R2. So if you are running extended support for that, just be aware that there's a servicing stack update this month for that platform. And Windows 10 and Windows 11 lifecycle awareness. So if you take a look at the 22H2, this was the final security update for Home and Pro editions. And for 21H2, this month again was the final security update for that. So October was the last security update for that. Starting next month, no security updates if you're on the Windows 11 Home or Pro for 22H2 and Windows 11 Enterprise and Education 21H2. So be aware of that and make sure that if you have any stragglers, any final systems you need to get moved off of there, you get those wrapped up between now and next month to make sure that you don't get disrupted for security updates.
Chris, it's hard to believe that Windows 11 is already reaching end of life for some of its branches.
Yes, yeah, it's all a blur nowadays. Windows 11 is definitely been in the market for a little while now, but we've got the first end of life. LTSCs, I think we talked about all the relevant topics today. The new LTSC branches are available, so if you are using that, there's no looming immediate end of life there, but you've got the new branches to be able to take a look at and start to plan for getting ready to move to that. And I think on that, Todd, we're ready for the bulletin release updates.
Sounds good. Let's move on. Hear what happened this month. As Chris mentioned, Chrome dropped late in the day yesterday, around 3 o'clock Central Time, so we were able to pick this one up and pull it in. They did say in the bulletin that there were 3 security issues addressed, but they did only report 2 vulnerabilities, specifically by CVEs. So they are fixed in this particular release. They were remote code execution type vulnerabilities as well. So just kind of be aware you have a Chrome update available. Chris also mentioned there were a couple of updates from Zoom. Both of these were rated just important. These are information disclosure type vulnerabilities. They did release 2 bulletins. I've listed them both here, this one and the next slide that you'll see. One of them they called out, these do impact the Zoom workplace apps. I provided a list of the apps there. There actually are multiple versions of these for the different operating systems, so they do call them out in more detail. If you want more information about this particular vulnerability, you can click on the link that I have buried in this slide here. Again, just rated important because they are information disclosure type vulnerabilities. Here's the second one. This one has to do with incorrect ownership assignment. Again, as Chris mentioned, Zoom provides kind of a regular stream of updates on their different apps, and in this case, they address these 2 different vulnerabilities this month. And they just happened to drop on Patch Tuesday, so we included them here for everybody to be aware of them. Moving on to the Windows side, we did see a large number of CVEs addressed this month, starting with Windows 11, 68 different vulnerabilities. I did highlight in red the ones that Chris called out in his introduction. The first 2, they're 43572 and 43573 are the ones that are both known exploited and publicly disclosed, as Chris mentioned. And the other 3 there in red are the publicly disclosed ones. I had a question earlier about the one that requires further action. You'll note that 43573, the second one, is the one that requires some additional action. The first one is the Management Console secure file issue that is addressed directly with the patch. So the second one, though, requires some configuration action, so be aware of that one. It was kind of interesting as I was reading through on the Windows 11 release. If you were on our call last month, I had a huge list of issues. They had that dual boot issue that they introduced with the Linux and Windows versions. They had some issues they've been carrying forward for several months. And lo and behold, this month they only reported 1 issue, and it's a very minor one. It has to do with the current release, the 24H2 one that came out. This particular program on ARM devices is unable to play, and you have to download it directly from the manufacturer. So just kind of be aware of that one. Very minor as far as issues go, so I think we're in pretty good shape on the Windows 11 side. Windows 10 update, 91 vulnerabilities, huge number this month. Very important, obviously, that you apply these quickly. That's why they're rated critical this month. Again, updates across all the operating systems. Same vulnerabilities as far as the publicly disclosed and known exploited that I have reported in the previous slide on Windows 11. Again, if you want to know more about these, dig into the individual KB articles. Kind of interesting as well, they cleaned up a lot of issues on the Windows 10 updates as well. The dual boot issues have now been kind of limited down to the LTS, the 2021 releases, the 22H2 editions. They do provide a workaround on their release health site, so you can take a look at that if you need to work around these. I don't know, it didn't say specifically that they are going to be able to resolve these in these OSs, so we'll see. We'll keep a look at these for next month. and we'll find out if they do. But basically, very minor as far as issues go on both the Windows 10 and the Windows 11 side this month. So some pretty solid updates, we hope. We'll see what that gets reported over the next week or so as these updates are rolled out across your environments. We did see a SharePoint server update addressing just one vulnerability. It's not publicly exploited or it's not publicly disclosed or known exploited. I included the links to the 3 different versions that they're supporting. Still subscription server, Server 2016 and Server 19 are all under support, obviously. And again, only one CVE addressed this month. No known issues reported against that. We did see an update for Office. It was primarily addressed at Microsoft Excel 2016. There was also included, obviously, bundled in the overall Office Suite 2016 as well. Two vulnerabilities not known to be exploited or publicly disclosed. Microsoft only rated these as important this month as well. We did see a few more vulnerabilities addressed in the click-to-run versions of the Office applications. Again, this includes the O365 apps, Office 2019, and the 2 long-term service channels, 2021 and the newly released 2024 that Chris talked about also in the introduction. Again, 5 vulnerabilities addressed. None of these are known to be exploited or are they publicly disclosed. So again, just rated important this month, but obviously you should roll them out fairly quickly after you get those 2 critical operating system updates rolled out. We did see a .NET framework update this month as well for general distribution. 2 vulnerabilities addressed. Both of these are denial of service type vulnerabilities. I tried to get more information about all these vulnerabilities and provide them here in my slide, but Microsoft hasn't been providing a lot of information on a lot of these vulnerabilities that they're addressing, other than to say it's a denial of service vulnerability. So not much to report on these. There are 2 flavors of these, or forms of these, if you will. There's the MR, which is the monthly roll-up. These include all of the .NET updates that have been released over the last couple of years. And then there's also the security-only update, which only addresses these 2 vulnerabilities this month. If you are applying the security-only updates, again, you have to apply these regularly every month to make sure that you get all of these CVEs addressed. Again, this is kind of the model that Microsoft had under their older operating systems and their older components like .NET, such that there is a cumulative update and there is a standalone update. And of course, the standalone update was designed to help you have more control over what was being patched in your environment if you have applications that are sensitive to these kinds of updates. Microsoft is kind of fading away from security-only updates and moving more to the full cumulative model with all of their recent operating system and application upgrades. Chris talked about the Between the Patch Tuesdays, and we had a lot of activity this month as well. I break them out here by security updates with CVEs for those vendors that report the vulnerabilities specifically in them, and I can provide a list here on the following slides. We also know that there are a lot of security updates that the manufacturers call out as security updates, but they don't list the CVE specifically. We assume that there are public CVEs addressed, but also maybe there are some additional security issues that have been fixed that have not been publicly reported. So again, we just lump them into the security updates without CVEs category. Then, of course, we have the performance and the regular updates that the manufacturers release as well, and we break those out. So this month, throughout the month, we did talk about that, Google has gone pretty much to a weekly release strategy on Google Chrome. So as we would expect, there's usually between 3 and 4 updates that come out throughout the month. This month is no exception. We did have a release, and you can see the dates here when these came out. This was 9/17, then 9/24, and then 10/03, and of course we had the one yesterday. Google's updates are cumulative, so if you're applying the latest one, you are getting all the vulnerabilities addressed properly. We saw some Firefox and some Firefox ESR updates as well between the Patch Tuesdays here. In addition, they did a major update across all of their apps here back on October 1st, so be aware of that one. We saw Foxit PDF Editor, and there's different forms, released number of updates. PDF Exchange Editor as well addressed 8 vulnerabilities this month. So if you're using any of those particular PDF management tools, be aware of that. Their Exchange Pro version had 24 vulnerabilities they addressed, and their Plus version here had the same 24 as well, so be aware of those. We did see an update for Thunderbird as well this month. On the Apple side, we did see updates from Apple for their operating systems. I did here on the next slide list the operating system updates that came out. Since then, there has been a .1 release of each one of these, but the security slide or security bulletin side doesn't list any CVE specifically. But you can see that in these particular releases, we had Sequoia come out officially, and you'll notice that the Monterey version has been dropped now from a support standpoint. Apple's model is to support the last 3 operating systems. So now you'll see updates coming out for Ventura, Sonoma, and Sequoia. Again, Sequoia rolled in earlier this month, and now they've already addressed 78 vulnerabilities out of the chute. They've kind of been updating their beta version, and again, a major update for that. And we see 30 and 37 vulnerabilities addressed, respectively, in the older operating systems. Safari updates are rolled into a lot of these operating systems, but there's also a standalone update as well for Ventura and Sonoma, and they just released 3 vulnerability updates for these particular Safari 18 version. Obviously, Google Chrome also coming out for the Apple side of the house as well as Windows, as mentioned earlier. Slight difference in vulnerability sometime, depending upon the manifestation of the vulnerability on the different operating systems. So although you'll see generally the same version numbers released, there might be variable numbers between the Windows and the Apple updates, depending upon what vulnerabilities they're addressing. Same thing here, we saw Firefox and Firefox ESR updates for Apple side as well. Microsoft Edge, a lot of people run the Microsoft Edge version for Apple on top of their systems. Again, you'll see a lot of the vulnerabilities reflected across from the Chrome side as well, because obviously Edge is based on Chrome, which is incorporating the same vulnerability set for the most part. And with that, Chris, I think we're ready to talk about the Q&A. Let's see what we got.
Yeah, there's a couple of good ones here that are ideal to bring up for everybody. The first one, and thank you for the reminder, Paul. This is the month where TLS 1.0 and 1.1 are being deprecated. So October 31st, be aware that deprecation is going on. So Paul had an additional question though, which is, what about kind of an extended support for this if it's still needed? So I think the challenge that is going to occur here is, depending on what you're utilizing from a technology perspective, you're going to find that a lot of vendors are going to be locking this down pretty tight. In fact, one of the reasons that it slipped my mind was the fact that we've already had a push from many of our customers for our SaaS products to start to deprecate some of the cipher suites in 1.2 that are questionable. Like they're looking at those cipher suites and saying that they're less secure, less ideal, overall as well. So I think, Paul, the biggest concern there is going to be making sure that you know exactly what requires TLS 1.1 or 1.0 and locking down your environment to allow only that TLS communication between those systems and the application specifically that they need that for. Microsoft is only the beginning of the challenges of locking this down. Vendors are going to be looking to remove TLS 1.0 and 1.1 as much as possible going forward, I think. So that one is definitely a tough situation. If you are in an environment where you know that's still out there, again, get very specific. What systems need it? What application are they talking to? And try to configure for just that specific configuration. Anything else, you should be using TLS 1.2 and later, because it's definitely going to be one that I think will disappear quickly from the market after the deprecation here. Pierce had a question. which was when's the best time to carry out Windows updates and how many days after they're released is ideal for doing those. So this is one where I think what we're seeing trend wise is organizations are struggling to try to balance that, how quickly versus trying to avoid operational impacts. So one of the biggest challenges that you on the operations side have is you've got the urgency around security fixes needing to be rolled out, especially when we've got things like 0 days. How do we keep up with, how do we keep, reduce that exposure time? So security is going to be all over you for that. At the same time, you've got the business wanting to keep things running and operational because the company at the end of the day has to make money. So how do you keep things operationally flowing? Now, I've seen strategies that range across the board. It's really hard to have a definitive right answer here. I would say that our guidance is you get kind of into this is kind of what we're expecting going forward. There's 2016, I mentioned this earlier, we saw a shift from more of a 30-day maintenance window down to a 14-day maintenance window. And that was based off of real trends, real threat behaviors. The average exploit was happening within 14 days of the release from the vendor. So 50% of vulnerabilities that were being exploited, they're going to happen in 14 days or less. Yes, there's going to be vulnerabilities that get exploited after that, but the majority of that exposure really starts to peak right around that 14-day mark. So that's where you saw a number of frameworks and regulatory requirements really start to shift towards that 14 days as that ideal cycle. What we're seeing now, 8 years later, is we are seeing a trend where we have to figure out how to accelerate some things further. We've talked a lot about getting to like a risk-based prioritization strategy. The next step now is how do we go from risk-based prioritization into risk-based remediation? And for those of you using Ivanti Neurons, the patch management experience there, you saw in August, we released an update to the policy that really tries to start to encapsulate what this looks like from an execution perspective. You're still going to have your call it monthly maintenance, but usually it's a starting on Patch Tuesday as your starting point each month. And if you're running a 30-day maintenance window, a 14-day maintenance window, a 7-day maintenance, whatever, but it's that once a month maintenance that you're doing, yes, we're going to continue to keep doing that because things like the OS updates are typically going to be once a month. Now, there's a number of third-party apps and other things that are continuously delivering. So that's where we have added what we refer to as priority updates. This is a policy, a task within that policy that's really meant to focus more on weekly or even daily activities where you're targeting specific applications that, one, are closer to the user, so they're more highly susceptible to social engineering tactics to exploit vulnerabilities in those. And two, they release much more frequently. So Chrome, as Todd walked us through, you basically get a Chrome security update every week. That means Edge updates every week. If you look at Firefox, that's updating about 2 to 3 times each month. On any given week, you're updating 2 to 3 browsers within your environment if you're trying to keep up with security vulnerabilities like that. Chrome earlier this year had 3 0 days within a week and a half, 2 almost back to back the week before June Patch Tuesday, and 1 shortly after. Well, if I didn't do anything since May and I just did the Patch Tuesday update for June, I had a window of longer exposure to those 2 0 days that were being targeted before. And post Patch Tuesday, I had a 0 day that got introduced that now I might be exposed to for weeks yet until my next round of patching. So that priority updates task is really meant to try to target those continuous release updates that are definitely higher profile and need to be resolved more frequently. The other task that we introduced there is called zero-day response, which many our products had ways to take more direct action now if you want to, but really organizations have been really striving to go from out of band response to that into basically more of a turnkey. We've got a predefined task, we know the process to get something in there, and we just automatically go from, hey, there's a Google Chrome 0-day, it automatically gets added to that, and within 48 hours is the typical SLA for those. You can see that being resolved. And we've even got customers who are they may have 48 hours as their SLA, but they've got a target of trying to burn down to, being compliant within 4 to 8 hours of release from the vendor for some 0 days. So what we're seeing, Pierce, is organizations trying to get more and more aggressive on that. Many of the people that are on this call, many of you have either already started your pilot groups testing this month's patches, or today is the start of your maintenance window. And most of you probably have a 14-day cycle for most of those updates. But I would wager a good percentage of you are starting to see that more aggressive weekly or even daily priority update cycle, and probably have a well-defined 0-day response policy as well. So hopefully that helps a little bit there, Pierce. But that's definitely the trends that we're seeing. I think that was the two main questions that I saw that meant or could be a good response for everybody to hear on that. So we are right at time. So we'll go ahead and wrap there for this month. Thank you, everyone, for joining us once again. And we look forward to talking to you again in November.
Thanks, everyone. See you all.